want to talk about our readings for this module. The readings this week I selected from the book Tycoons by Charles Morris because it introduces us to some significant characters in the history of American business and ties up some loose ends of things that we've talked about previously and really gets us into the Gilded Age, which is an important time in the history of American business. The Gilded Age is considered to be the period after the Civil War to about 1900, and it's during this period of time that the modern super economy, if you will, begins to form in the U.S. with the rise of the modern giant mega corporation. And so it's important that we understand this era. The Gilded Age is also the era in which we witness the rise of the so-called robber barons. And I know when class started, people were anxious to learn about the robber barons, the big capitalist of the era. This is a group of people who aren't treated kindly by historians. Men such as Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Jay Gould, J.P. Morgan have all been portrayed as heartless capitalists who really maximized profits at the expense of workers. And that's a fair characterization. But another way to look at this, or the way I look at this group, especially men like Carnegie and Rockefeller, they were really the first, what I'm going to call scientific capitalists. And by this I mean that they were two of the first business owners who devised strategies to gain efficiencies and gain scale that allowed them to completely dominate markets. Keep in mind in this period of time, 1870s, early 1880s, there were really no rules for business. We talked about government regulation in a previous class, and there just weren't any rules back then. This was a time when there were no such thing as really monopoly laws, and a time of true free markets or laissez-faire. Carnegie became the number one steel manufacturer at a time when the modern U.S. was literally being built. You think about that. Railroad tracks, bridges, skyscrapers. The modern U.S. infrastructure was literally built from steel, and Carnegie Steel controlled the market for manufacturing. So, it's really a big deal for its time. The same is true with Rockefeller. After 1859, when Colonel Drake first struck oil in western Pennsylvania, it was Rockefeller who cornered the market on refining and capitalized on the manufacture of kerosene. This might not seem like a big deal to us now, but before kerosene, the way people lit their homes, was with candles or whale oil, and kerosene was a big development at the time for illumination. This is some 30, 40 years before the invention of a practical indoor light bulb and electricity. So it's not a small market. And Rockefeller didn't even make gasoline at the beginning because there were no cars. Rockefeller cornered the market not only domestically but globally, shipping kerosene all the way to the Philippines, to China, back in the middle of the late 1800s. So Rockefeller and Carnegie both capitalized on products that were in crazy high demand at the time, maybe akin to a corporation like Apple today. Anyway, the readings for this week are enjoyable and will serve as an introduction to an era where we will be spending some significant time. We're going to start by putting the era in perspective, and I think Morris does a good job of this, from the death of Lincoln. But also he goes backwards. Speaking of Lincoln, I don't know if you knew this or not, but Lincoln was a real gadget guy himself, a real tinkerer, and he's actually the only president that holds a patent at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, patent 6469 for a riverboat flotation device. And turns out that Abe was a real big free market guy. He once talked about the free market. There's a quote from him out there that, it's best for all to leave each man to acquire property as fast as he can. And some will get wealthy, and I don't think there should be any laws to prevent a man from getting rich. So you can kind of get a feel for where Abe was coming from, kind of caught up in this economic boom that was beginning at the time. There's so much more from this era, from the Homestead Act in 1862 all the way to the beginning of the long economic boom, which I could argue is still going on to some extent today. The economy and business just explodes after the Civil War with really the build out of a unified country. The second chapter you're going to read in Morris is called Glorious Yankee Doodle, and it gives us an overview of several themes we already touched upon, from Cyrus McCormick, who we talked about, all the way to Thomas Blanchard. Eli Whitney may have been the first one to promote the idea of interchangeable parts, but it was people like Blanchard and John Hall who really made that a reality and really were machinists who perfected the idea of interchangeable parts. For you Kobe and business students out there who are or maybe will be taking quality management in your course of studies, I think you have to look at John Hall as a critical part of consistent manufacturing, which plays a small part in quality management. There's a great story about Hall, who invented a rifle with interchangeable parts, took it to the U.S. Patent Office to patent it, and the commissioner at the time, William Thornton, actually took credit for Hall's ideas back in 1811. So the other thing is that the 1800s, with no regulations, were a time of great corruption as well. And as you read the story about Hall and Thornton, you can get a feel for how that corruption actually shook out in the marketplace. Anyway, the readings are of great interest. They're easy to get through. I think you'll enjoy them, and they will get us where we need to be in the Gilded Age. And we'll have some questions about the readings on our discussion board to follow, and we'll have a few more video snippets of some inventions and important businessmen coming up soon. So that's it for now. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.